Tonight, we begin with a development that U.S. defense officials had anticipated, feared, and prepared for. A move that unfolded not over months, but in hours. Hours that changed the calculus of this conflict. Hours that exposed vulnerabilities Russia never expected. Hours that left the Kremlin scrambling for answers. What Washington did today crossed a line that Moscow had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, Putin responded with outrage, denial, and barely concealed panic. For months now, there had been whispers, not from official Pentagon briefings, not from State Department press conferences, just whispers that the United States was preparing something unprecedented. Washington has been supportive of Ukraine, yes, but they have been calculated in their support. Their weapons packages have followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a predictability. But what set off alarm bells in Moscow this week was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor U.S. military logistics know the indicators. The cargo flights to Eastern Europe, the encrypted communications between defense contractors, the sudden meetings at Ramstein Air Base, the sudden deployment of specialized technical teams, all of that went quiet. And whenever Washington goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Early Thursday morning, Russian air defense networks detected what they described as unidentified aerial signatures, including flight patterns that had not been observed in over 3 years. These are the kinds of weapons systems that the United States only deploys when signaling something very specific: escalation dominance, technological superiority, or strategic commitment. Russian commanders didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that America was changing its posture. And when a superpower shifts posture without explanation, even by small degrees, adversaries pay attention. The warning issued by Russian state media tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Kremlin officials described America's move as provocative, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, game-changing in ways Moscow cannot immediately counter. But intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Ukraine did not. Within hours of receiving these new systems, Ukrainian forces launched precision strikes. These weren't the standard HIMARS attacks we've seen before. These were stealth missile strikes, weapons systems that Ukraine only deploys when preparing to hit high-value strategic targets. Tonight, Pentagon sources confirm that Ukraine launched coordinated strikes on Russian positions, including a command center that had recently been relocated for strategic planning purposes. Ukraine struck before Russia could disperse their assets. They hit ammunition depots. They hit logistics hubs. They hit air defense systems that were preparing to counter future attacks. In other words, Ukraine targeted the entire support infrastructure, the backbone that would have made Russian offensive operations possible. America's weapons transfer wasn't just symbolic, it was operationally decisive. And Ukraine, understanding that fully, responded with precision. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't broadcast their intentions. They didn't waste missiles on secondary targets. They hit command nodes. They hit communication systems. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Military analysts now believe that Putin's recent posturing was designed to test Western resolve after months of political uncertainty. Putin wanted to see whether Washington would blink. But instead, the opposite happened. The United States didn't hesitate. They delivered weapons systems so advanced, so unexpected, that even Moscow noticed. You don't get the Kremlin's attention easily. But today, Washington did. Defense officials speaking under anonymity described Russia's shift as reactive desperation, a way to mask growing vulnerability. But Ukraine proved today that they remain both capable and lethal. Their strikes were timed so perfectly that Russian forces had no warning. That timing shows intelligence coordination at the highest levels. It shows that Ukraine is not playing defense anymore. They are dictating the tempo of this conflict. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Ukraine's operations. Ukrainian special forces carried out coordinated ground operations, forcing Russian units to abandon forward positions. Ukrainian drones targeted supply convoys moving under cover of darkness. Ukrainian cyber units reportedly disrupted communication networks used by Russian commanders. This wasn't just military pressure. This wasn't just tactical success. This was strategic coordination. This was operational synchronization. And operational synchronization is the one thing Russia has struggled to maintain since this war began. Remember, Putin thought NATO would fracture under pressure. He thought Western weapons would arrive too slowly to matter. He thought Ukraine would eventually negotiate from weakness. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. NATO is more unified than ever. Western weapons are arriving faster and deadlier. Ukraine is negotiating from a position of growing strength. What makes this moment so dangerous and so decisive is that America's latest move happened when Putin is under enormous internal pressure. Military hardliners want total escalation. Economic advisors want to preserve remaining resources. Regional governors want an end to mobilization costs. Intelligence services want to avoid further embarrassment. Putin is balancing these demands while managing a war that has exceeded every original timeline. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from vulnerability. Washington's statement, now circulating through diplomatic channels, signals that America is not willing to allow Russian aggression to succeed. Officials said plainly that Moscow's escalation rhetoric was inconsistent with responsible international conduct. That is diplomatic language for, we're not backing down. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed his nation in a measured, confident speech tonight. He said, "We asked for the tools to defend ourselves and our partners delivered." He said, "Every missile that hits its target brings peace closer." And he said, "Russia will learn that time is not on their side." These are statements from a nation that understands just how high the stakes have become. Military strategists are now considering several possibilities. One is that Putin is preparing a major counteroffensive. Another is that Putin is attempting to provoke a diplomatic crisis. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Putin is attempting to establish new red lines that would freeze the conflict in Russia's favor. But today, Ukraine took that card off the table. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't hesitate over targeting decisions. They struck decisively. Tonight, intelligence sources monitoring Russian force movements say Putin's inner circle is divided on next steps. Emergency meetings have continued throughout the night. Russia's decision to escalate rhetoric is likely part of a broader pressure campaign intended to fracture Western unity. But Washington is not backing down. Their response today, swift, coordinated, and overwhelming, sent a message to Moscow that further aggression will be met with further consequences. As the coming days unfold, we expect more details to emerge about what these stealth missiles can achieve. But what we do know is that America's decision was timely. It reinforced Ukrainian capabilities at a critical moment. It demonstrated Western technological superiority. And it forced Russia to recalculate its entire strategy. And tonight, for the first time in months, Putin appears uncertain. The Kremlin is quiet, too quiet. And when Putin is quiet, it means he is calculating, because tonight, Putin learned something he has learned many times before. Underestimating Western resolve is dangerous. Underestimating Ukrainian determination is fatal. And underestimating American technology is catastrophic. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The weapons have arrived. The strikes have begun. And the balance of power is shifting. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.